Hey, what's up guys? It's Fly with Clayton and welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be taking a look at IFR departures. Now, when we depart VFR, it's a pretty simple procedure. We simply look up in the sky and we look out for any obstacles or aircraft that might possibly be in our way. But IFR, it's a little different. We're up in the clouds, we can't see the ground, we can't see obstacles, we can't see other traffic. So how can we safely depart IFR? Well, thankfully, the FAA has outlined some procedures for us. So let's take a look at what we got. First of all, most of what we're going to be talking about today comes from AIM 52-9. So if you guys want to reference some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about, you guys can check that out in AIM 52-9. So departing VFR and picking up an IFR clearance in the air. That's option number one. If the sky and the weather is good enough, if there's no clouds or no traffic, we can just simply take off VFR and just call up approach and pick up our IFR clearance in the air. That's always an option. But what if the ground and the weather at the airport is bad? We cannot depart VFR if the clouds are too low or the visibility is too low. How can we ensure that we're going to have obstacle clearance? Thankfully, the FAA outlined some departure procedures. Now, I want to say, according to the AIM, there are two types of departure procedures. Technically, I like to tell my students there's 4 ways we can depart IFR. But according to the FAA and the AIM, there's 2 departure procedures. And those 2 procedures are an obstacle departure, or an ODP, or we also have a standard instrument departure known as a SID. So let's first take a look at an obstacle departure procedure, ODP. Obstacle departure procedures, ODP, is a pre-planned IFR departure procedure to provide obstruction clearance via the least I can't even say that word. I'm just going to let you guys read that one. Route from the terminal area to the appropriate en route structure. Very simply, it is ensuring that you can take off from an airport and not hit any obstacles and get up to your en route route, whatever it might be. So ODPs can be printed either textually or graphically. So that's kind of nice that they can be just written out what you need to do, or they can actually have a graphic depicting out what you need to do. ODPs can be flown without an ATC clearance unless an alternate departure procedure such as a SID or a radar vector has been assigned by ATC, so that's nice to know. So let's take a look at an example of a graphical ODP. This is the Drake 2 departure. This is in Glendale, Arizona, and you can see up there at the top it's called the Drake 2 departure, and it has in the parentheses there obstacle departure. Now it also says that this is an RNAV departure. So in order to fly this ODP, and it says it down in the notes down there, we do need a GPS that is RNAV1 capable in order to fly this departure. Most of the time, if you're trying to fly an ODP and you're looking at it, if it shows up in your GPS, if your GPS is capable of showing it, it will show up. If it doesn't show up, then that's more than likely an indication that your GPS is not capable of it. So that can kind of be a tell for you if you're not really sure about the different types of RNAVs or different types of GPS there, whether you're capable of doing it or not. So let's take a look at this Drake 2 departure, and let's pretend we're actually going to fly it. We're going to take off from runway 19, and we're going to fly this departure procedure. So first of all, if we take a look up here at the top, we talked about the fact that we need to have RNAV for this, but let's take a look at some of these takeoff obstacle notes. They're good to know here before we depart. Runway 19 says trees are beginning 281 feet from the departure end of the runway, 331 feet left of the center line, and up to 33 feet AGL, or 1,060 feet MSL. So just some good situational awareness for us. We can also get our ATIS frequency, our ground control frequency, all our frequencies up there in the top left of this, which is super nice. But if we move on down to the bottom, we have our route description that tells us what we need to do. So down there in the departure route description box, we can see takeoff runway 19. It tells us to climb heading 194 to 1,580, then a left turn direct to Waytag, I think that's how you say it, then as depicted to cross Carlo at or above 10,000, and then on track 350 to DRK Vortac. Expect filed out 2-3 minutes after departure. So let's actually have a little icon up on screen and let's fly this out. So the notes tell us to climb on a heading of 194. So we're going to climb on a heading of 194 until we reach 1,580. Once we make or reach 1,580, we can make that climbing left turn up there and then continue on to Wateg, and that's going to be direct. Now, your turn might not look exactly like this. It's probably not going to be exactly to scale depending on how fast your aircraft is flying. But as long as you climb to 1,580, they've deemed it safe for you to make a direct left turn no matter how fast your aircraft's going there, up to continue to climb up to Wateg. Then we'll turn, as you can see depicted on the chart there, it says heading 030 to Padre. And once we reach Padre, we're going to turn left, and we're going to move the sectional or move the diagram up here. And it says to fly 324 degrees up to Carlo. That little note there with the 10000, hope I got the number zeros there, the 10,000 with the line underneath it, it's telling us we need to cross Carlo at or above 10,000 feet. And then from there, we can continue on past Carlo. We continue on up to the Drake VOR, and then wherever your depicted route is from there. So that is the Drake 2 departure out of Glendale. Pretty straightforward, not too crazy. And you can see it's literally drawn out exactly what you need to do, and it's kind of like a map, essentially, giving you exact directions what you need to do. And this is graphically depicted. But what about an airport that has a textual description? Let's take a look at Jackson County here in North Carolina. This is 24 Alpha. If we take a look in ForeFlight here, now I screenshotted the web version. It looks the same on your iPad or on your phone. We want to go to the departure section here, and you'll see a little box there called takeoff minimums. So we're going to click on that takeoff minimums box. It's going to open up this document. Now, when you open it on an iPad or your iPhone, it's going to take you directly to that specific airport that you were looking at. When you open it on PC, it just brings up the takeoff minimums article for that whole region. I believe this is the Southeast one, so it has all the airports in the Southeast are listed in this takeoff minimums departure procedure document here. So we just got to go look for the Jackson County 124 Alpha, and if we scroll down and pretend we actually scrolled and found it, this is what we'll see when we get to that section. So you'll see it says takeoff minimums and obstacle departure procedures. The part we're looking for is the departure procedure right here. If I highlight it out, departure procedure, depending on which runway we take off, we have some textual notes on what we need to do on how to depart from this airport IFR. So for example, if we were departing runway 15, we need to climb on a heading of 140 degrees to 6,100 before we turn on course. If we depart from runway 33, we need to climb on a heading of 327 degrees to 6,400 proceeding on course. That is to ensure we don't hit any obstacles. This is telling us if we turn before reaching that 6,400 or 6,100, depending on what runway we took off of, you could potentially be crashing into an obstacle, which we definitely don't want to do. Jackson County's up in the mountains. There's a lot of tall mountains around it. You don't want to be turning into a mountain before you reach a safe altitude to start your turn. So that's what this is telling us to do, just giving us a heading to fly and an altitude to reach before we start a turn on course. Pretty straightforward on that. Next, we got SIDs. SIDs are my favorite, Standard Instrument Departure Procedures. These are pre-planned IFR ATC departure procedures printed for pilots and controllers to use in graphic form to provide obstacle clearance and a transition from the terminal area near the airport to the appropriate en route structure. Now, the thing we need to remember about SIDs are designed for system enhancement and ease of traffic flow. It also reduces ATC's workload. We're going to take a look at a SID from Atlanta here, and I want you to keep that in mind. Imagine ATC needed to tell you every single fix on this departure procedure, this SID, to fly to. And they had to give you altitudes, all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of extra work for them. So these SIDs are designed to take a lot of that workload off of ATC, so they can just clear you for a SID, and then they can kind of hands off, let you do your thing. It just reduces their workload significantly. ATC clearance is required to fly a SID, unlike the ODP, so keep that in mind. Let's take a look at Atlanta. Again, we're going to go to the departure section for the Hartsfield Atlanta Airport here. You'll see there's a lot of SIDs for this airport, but the one I am real fond of is the Palmer 3 departure. So if I pull this up, first of all, you'll notice this is sideways. Can't really read it that well. Let's turn it around so we can actually see it much better. So this is the Palmer 3 departure. A lot of notes for this departure. First of all, for most of you guys in flight school training and probably an Archer or a Cessna, we're not going to be able to fly this departure because this is for turbojet aircraft only. But we'll pretend for the sake of example that our little Piper Archer or our Cessna 172 has a turbojet, so we'll talk about this and how we can fly it. Another thing that's important, we need RNAV1, DME, our IRU or GPS to fly this departure. Most of the modern airliners that are flying this are going to have that. If we don't have GPS, we need radar, which basically means we need to be in radar contact with Atlanta in order to do this departure without GPS. So let's take a look at it. A lot of things here, and it's very, as you can see, it's very graphical. It's telling us we have a lot of highways, it looks like, or roads, paths to get us out of Atlanta. We're going to pretend we're going to take off from runway 6 right. 6 right is, if you see down there, I use my mouse here, the 6 right is this second runway right here. So we're going to try to take off from this runway. We're taking off 26 right, which is, or excuse me, 26 left, which is departing this direction. So we need to go to page 2. You'll see here it says continued on following page. We'll go over to page 2, and this is going to give us our departure instructions based on which runway we're doing. So if we highlight down here, 26 left, if we're going to take off 26 left, we're going to climb on a heading of 275 degrees to intercept course 299 to impasse. Then on the depicted route to Palmer, maintain 250 knots. That's what the 250K means, to Zaleen. Then we continue on at the bottom down there. It says to maintain 10,000, expect file clearance. We're not going to go that far. We're just going to talk about the actual part around here. So again, let's fly it. Got our little plane going up on 26 left. As we start our takeoff, we're going to fly on a heading of 275. And once we reach that course, imagine that, because it says course 299, think of it as a radial going towards impasse. So when we reach that 299 course, we're going to turn and fly towards impasse. When we reach impasse, it says to follow the depicted route. We can see over there just above our little airplane icon, we're going to turn to a heading of 006 degrees. I have to like tilt my head to see it, to Zaleen. Now you'll see at Zaleen, underneath that Zaleen text, there's 250K with lines at above it and below it. That means we need to be exactly at 250 knots when we cross Zaleen. Now remember, we're pretending our little Archer is capable of that, our little 172, but most of the airliners obviously shouldn't have any problem with that. Once we reach Zaleen, you'll see the line continues to the right to 094 degrees over to Smog. So we'll continue on there to Smog. Once we hit Smog, we're going to turn to 083 to Dillon, and from Dillon 072 degrees up to Palmer, which it would then continue on out, but we're not going to talk about the rest of that. You guys get the idea of how these departure work. It's just we go to the runway that we're taking off from, we read our instructions, and it's graphically depicted of how we depart out of there. Pretty straightforward. I honestly love SIDs. I think they're real easy to fly, and they obviously make ATC's workload way better. Now here's a question for you. What if there is no SID or ODP at an airport? How on earth can we safely depart out of an airport and ensure that we're not going to hit anything? Well, you might be saying, well, I'd take off and turn on course to my first fix or something like that if I don't have a SID or an ODP, but how are you sure you're not going to hit anything? We need some assurance that we're not going to crash into any obstacle or mountain, because we can't see the ground. We're in IMC conditions. We're in the clouds. Thankfully, the FAA helps us out here. All U.S. airports with a published instrument approach, but with no published departure procedure, meet what's called the diverse airport criteria. So what does that mean? This criteria requires that an airport has been surveyed for no obstacles within a 200-foot altitude per nautical mile up to a minimum IFR altitude. So for example, let's say there's an airport that's at 1,000 feet elevation. In the AROCA, the off-route obstruction clearance altitude in the sector that airport is in is 2,000 feet. If that airport meets the diverse airport criteria, that means we could take off from that airport, climb with a 200-foot per nautical mile climb gradient, and we would get up to 2,000 feet in any direction from that airport without hitting any obstacles. So, what is a diverse departure procedure? Well, let's take a look at it. Diverse airport departures provide obstacle clearance when a departure procedure is not published. We just talked about that. There is criteria that needs to be in place. We already talked about the 200 foot per nautical mile, but there is other criteria that needs to be in place unless otherwise specified. Sometimes they can specify maybe a steeper climb gradient or maybe a certain heading before you turn a certain direction, something like that. Unless it's otherwise specified, here's the criteria we need to do. We need to depart across the departure end of the runway at least 35 feet above the runway. We also need to climb to 400 feet above the departure end of the runway before making our first turn. So if you're climbing out, if our airport's at 1,000 feet again, 1,000 feet MSL, and we climb up to 1,300, we need to wait another 100 feet before we start our turn. So we got to cross over or make our first turn once we hit 400 feet above the departure end. And then finally, we also need to maintain a climb gradient of at least 200 feet per nautical mile. That's what we talked about. Assuming you comply with all of this criteria, you can make a turn to the minimum IFR altitude in that area without hitting any obstacles or terrain. Now, I want to note, I should have mentioned this before, but this is something to keep in mind. This criteria is also required for flying an ODP or a SID. They're assuming you can pass over the departure end of the runway at 35 feet, climb to 400 feet, and then maintain a climb gradient of at least 200 feet per nautical mile. So that's criteria for the SIDS and ODPs. We just want to make sure understood that you need to maintain that criteria, but ODPs and SIDS have a published course or instruction. A diverse departure area, as long as we meet that criteria, we can turn any direction and not hit any obstacle. It's assuring us of obstacle clearance. So let's take a look at an airport here. We got Fairfield County Airport, my favorite airport that I did a lot of my check rides at. Let's take a look at Fairfield County. You'll see here, there is no SIDS and there's no ODPs. If I go into the takeoff minimum section, there's no obstacle departure notes here for runway 4 or 22. They give us a lot of notes here on trees that are in place. That's just kind of like a situational awareness, but there's no procedures on how to depart from runway 4 or 22. So guess what? That means runway 4 and 22 meets the diverse airport criteria. So if we took off runway 4, as long as we pass over the departure end of runway 4 at 35 feet above the ground, and we climb at least 200 feet per nautical mile, and at 400 feet AGL, we can make a turn safely that will get us on course to wherever we're going. If I actually jump back here and we look, see if it shows it. I don't think the screenshot shows it, but if we looked at our Aroka here, whatever that Aroka was, we'd be able to climb up to that Aroka after we reach 400 feet, taking off from runway 4, and be sure that we're not going to hit any obstacle. Now, some airports also do have published what we call departure procedures. So we're going to take a look at a diverse vector area. A diverse vector area is an area in which ATC may provide random radar vectors during an uninterrupted climb from the departure runway until above the MVA or MIA, established in accordance with the TERP's criteria for diverse departures. That's a lot of mumbo jumbo. Very simply put, ATC is giving you a radar vector for this. They're giving you a specific heading to fly. The DVA provides obstacle and terrain avoidance in lieu of taking off from a runway under IFR using an ODP or a SID. So, for example, Glendale has one. If we take a look at the takeoff minimum section that we talked about earlier, they have a section here called the diverse vector area, radar vectors. And it's telling you, for example, if we depart from runway 1, heading as assigned by ATC requires a minimum climb of 285 feet per nautical mile to 5,700, and then runway 19 is just heading as assigned by ATC. So very simply, we just fly the heading that ATC gives us once we take off from either one of those runways. Pretty straightforward. So that is 3 options. We got the SIDS, ODPs, and diverse departure. There's one more option, not very popular, but I want you to be aware of it, that it does exist. It's something called a visual climb over an airport, or a VCOA. Now, the key word here, it is a visual climb, spiraling up over the airport. This needs to be done in visual conditions. We cannot do this in IMC conditions. So, must be conducted in visual conditions. VCOA procedures, they are developed to avoid obstacles greater than 3 miles from the departure end of the runway as an alternate to complying with climb gradients greater than 200 feet per nautical mile. So let's pretend there's an airport that's in a valley of in the mountains. There's tall mountains and we need a steep climb gradient to get out. Maybe our little 172 or our Archer can't meet that climb gradient. What we can do is a VCOA. As long as the clouds allow us to, we take off and we're going to spiral above that airport as we climb up until we reach a specific altitude, whether it's assigned by ATC or it's given to us in the notes. Once we reach that altitude, then we can continue on our way. So thing we need to remember, if you're going to do a VCOA, we need to tell ATC as early as possible of your intent to fly it before you depart. So that's important. We also need to maintain within the prescribed distance in the published vicinity minimums during the climb over the airport until reaching the at or above altitude for the VCOA. So it's typically 3 miles, but if it's published as something else, you need to remain within that distance. Only within that ring, or in most cases 3 miles, are you guaranteed that safety of not crashing into anything. So always make sure you stay within that ring until you reach the at or above altitude. So a good one is Franklin County up in North Carolina, Macon County Airport 1 Alpha 5. If we take a look here, they have visual climb over airport criteria. So for runway 7 and 25, for climb and visual conditions, we need to remain within 3 nautical miles of the airport to cross the airport southbound at or above 7,600 via the ODF VOR radial 349, VORTAC, to that VOR or VORTAC. So I actually took the time, I showed it out here in ForeFlight. That line you're seeing is the 349 radial. I don't know if you can kind of see up here. Franklin County Airport's right underneath it here. So if we were going to do this visual climb over an airport, we would spiral above that airport, staying within 3 miles of the Franklin-Macon County Airport, up to 7,600. And once you reach 7,600, you can cross over the airport southbound on that 349 radial to the VOR. So not too hard there. The big thing, like I said, is visual climbs over an airport need to be conducted in visual conditions. You cannot do that spiraling up in the clouds. So you need to make sure you can get up to that altitude in a visual condition. So that's pretty much it. That is our 4 ways we can depart IFR: ODPs, SIDS, diverse departures, and visual climbs over an airport, on top of also just departing VFR and picking up your IFR clearance in the air. But these are the ways we can get out of an airport IFR. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you guys are enjoying these training videos, be sure to leave a like on the video. It really helps a lot. And if you guys have any topics you'd like for me to discuss in the future, be sure to let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to do some videos talking about them. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.